there, you're watching World News Program with me, Madam Zian, to the headlines. A new Israeli aggression targeted the General Staff Headquarters, the Ministry of Defense, and the vicinity of the presidential palace in the Syrian capital. Damascus condemned these strikes, describing them as part of a systematic policy aimed at undermining Syria's security. Turkey labeled the attacks a sabotage operation against Syria's stability, while the UN condemned the strikes. Dozens of Palestinians were killed or injured in the ongoing Israeli massacres across the Gaza Strip. At least 20 people suffocated to death at an aid distribution center, prompting urgent calls to immediately halt the operations of the American-run humanitarian facility. Also coming up, as part of efforts to strengthen partnerships with African nations, the fourth session of the Algerian-Zimbabwean Joint Cooperation Committee convened, with both sides stressing the need for a partnership that supports African development and integration goals. Meanwhile, on the second day of Shelter Afrique Development Bank General Assembly, Algeria was highly praised for its housing sector experience. Hello and welcome back to the details of your nightly news. The Israeli occupation launched a new series of airstrikes on several locations in the Syrian capital Damascus on Wednesday. According to the Syrian Arab news agency Sana, the Israeli airstrikes targeted the General Staff Headquarters, the Ministry of Defense, and the vicinity of the presidential palace in Damascus. Local sources reported a massive explosion near the Umayyad Square in central Damascus, an area that hosts several vital facilities. The Syrian Ministry of Health reported that 3 people were killed and 34 others were injured as a result of Israeli airstrikes on Damascus. Syrian media earlier reported multiple injuries from the strikes on the capital. The Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs strongly condemned what the Zionist aggression targeting government institutions and civilian facilities in Damascus and Sweda, which left several citizens dead and injured. In a statement, the ministry said the attack was part of a systematic policy by the Zionist entity to ignite tensions, create chaos, and undermine security and stability in Syria. It stressed that the strikes constitute a blatant violation of the UN Charter and international humanitarian law. The ministry urged the international community to assume its responsibilities and take immediate action to end the repeated aggression against the sovereign territory of a UN member state. It affirmed that Syria reserves its legitimate right to defend its land and people by all means permitted under international law. The Syrian Ministry of Interior announced Wednesday that a new ceasefire agreement had been reached in Sweda, just one day after a similar announcement. The Syrian news agency quoted a ministry source confirming that the agreement includes deploying security checkpoints in the city and fully reintegrating it under the authority of the Syrian state. The Syrian presidency strongly condemned on Wednesday the recent violations in Sweda province, vowing to hold those responsible accountable. In a statement, the presidency expressed deep concern over what criminal and unlawful acts that occurred in some areas of Sweda in recent days, saying such acts are unjustifiable. The Syrian authorities reaffirmed their full commitment to investigating all related incidents and prosecuting those involved, urging all parties to reject incitement and warning against attempts to undermine national unity. And in the same context, the Syrian Arab news agency reported a powerful explosion that rocked the capital, Damascus. The agency added that Israel drones carried out another airstrike targeting the city of Sweda at the same time, causing injuries among civilians. Turkey condemned on Wednesday the Israeli strikes on vital sites in Damascus, saying that the Zionist entity's goal is to destabilize the country. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said the Israeli attacks on Damascus constitute a sabotage operation aimed at undermining Syria's efforts to ensure peace, stability, and security. And for his part, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed deep concern on Wednesday over the Israeli strikes in Syria. In a statement, Rubio said Washington is holding discussions with both sides and all relevant parties regarding these developments, expressing hope for a resolution. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the Israeli airstrikes on Syria. His spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said in a statement that the Secretary General strongly condemns the escalation of Israeli airstrikes on Sweida, Daraa, and central Damascus, as well as reports of Israeli military redeployment in the Golan Heights. And Algeria strongly condemned the Zionist aggression against Syria, which constitutes a flagrant violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity, reiterating its urgent appeal to the UN Security Council to assume its responsibility to put an end to this repeated aggression. A press release issued by the Foreign Ministry indicated that the occupation's relentless escalation in the Middle East opens multiple fronts of aggression in an attempt to impose its hegemony over the states and peoples of the region with complete impunity. Now moving on to developments in occupied Palestinian territories. Around 80 Palestinians were killed and others injured in heavy Israeli airstrikes on several areas of the Gaza Strip early Wednesday morning. According to medical sources in Gaza, dozens of victims were brought to hospitals, among them women and children. The sources also reported that many people remain trapped under rubble or stranded in the streets, with civil defense teams unable to reach them. And as you follow, 21 Palestinians died from suffocation while trying to obtain humanitarian aid at the U.S.-run distribution center in Rafah, southern Gaza. The incident occurred when Palestinians rushed from long distances toward the facility at its opening, passing through a narrow passage from U.S. personnel, reportedly closed the gate and used pepper spray, causing mass suffocation and crowd-related fatalities. The government media office in Gaza said it will continue to expose the U.S.-run Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, holding it accountable for massacres committed with dirty tools that Palestinians will never forgive. In a statement Wednesday, the office said the foundation has become a model of mass death traps under a false humanitarian cover, demanding its immediate shutdown and an independent investigation into its activities. And 875 Palestinians were killed while attempting to obtain food in Gaza after being targeted by Israeli occupation forces, according to the UN Human Rights Office. The office's spokesperson, Tamim Sayed al-Khaitan, said 674 of the victims were killed near sites operated by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, while another 201 died while seeking food near UN or partner-run aid convoys in the besieged Strip.
As of the 13th of July, we have recorded 875 people killed in Gaza while trying to get food. 674 of them were killed in the vicinity of GHF sites. Now, the data we have is based on our own information gathering through various reliable sources, including medical, human rights, and humanitarian organizations.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer stressed the need for a ceasefire and the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Responding to a question about Gaza in Parliament on Wednesday, Starmer expressed outrage over attacks on Palestinians trying to reach aid, calling on Israel to take all necessary measures to protect civilians.
I would expect them to be fully... I am appalled by these suggestions in relation to Gaza, just as I'm appalled by the reports of yet more civilians being killed whilst trying to access aid. So on both fronts, I am appalled by what we are seeing and what we're hearing, and we raise it regularly, as he would expect. In relation to the civilians being killed, I would expect them to be fully and transparently investigated with full accountability for any failings. And Israel must clearly put in place measures that properly protect civilians in line with international law. And that is the case we're pressing repeatedly. But we do also want to see, and alongside that, an immediate ceasefire so that the remaining hostages can be brought out and aid at volume and at speed can be got in and a political process opened that, in my view, is the only way we're going to get a lasting solution.
The Deputy Permanent Representative of Algeria to the UN, Tawfiq Al-Eid Qudri, emphasized during a UN Security Council session devoted to the situation in Palestinian territories. He said that investigation and accountability are a must in order to put an end to the aggression perpetrated by the Zionist entity against the innocent Palestinian people.
The enormity of the atrocities that are being committed requires each one of us to listen to our humanity and to call for investigation and accountability. Before all that, we should call for a ceasefire and save the Palestinians. Mr. President, amidst these repeated massacres, we should not be fooled by names. We should not be distracted by legal arguments. Call it what you may: ethnic cleansing, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, or a military operation. The result is one and the same: bodies dying from thirst before dying with bombs and bullets, and children born without a childhood and dying without graves. Meanwhile, the world remains silent.
Algeria has called for intensified international efforts to put an end to the ongoing Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip and to demand an immediate ceasefire and permanent ceasefire in the enclave. In a statement, the Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that Lounes Megraman, Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry, speaking on behalf of the State Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, during the emergency ministerial meeting on Israeli violations against Palestinian people held in Colombia, stressed the need to pressure the Israeli occupation authorities to lift all restrictions and obstacles on humanitarian aid. The Algerian Foreign Ministry Secretary General Lounes Megraman also called during the meeting for safeguarding the two-state solution through the recognition of an independent Palestinian state, the revival of the political process, and the involvement of the international community in formulating and implementing a serious and credible initiative that would lead to a just solution, one that guarantees the Palestinian people the establishment of their fully sovereign independent state along the June 4th, 1967 borders with Al-Quds as its capital. Megraman stressed the need to hold the Israeli occupier accountable for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed against the Palestinian people to put an end to any desperate attempts aimed at liquidating the Palestinian cause. And Algeria's Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of African Affairs, Selma Bakhta-Bansouri, together with Zimbabwe's Permanent Secretary for Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Albert Chimbindi, co-chaired the opening of the fourth session of the Algerian-Zimbabwean Joint Cooperation Committee. In her speech, Mansouri reaffirmed Algeria and Zimbabwe's commitment to establishing a strategic partnership based on mutual benefit, serving the goals of African development and integration. She also noted plans to establish a joint high council between the two countries as a key mechanism to bring economic operators and stakeholders close together. Mansouri also welcomed progress in preparations for signing agreements and memorandums of understanding between the two countries. The CEO of Shelter Afrique Bank, Tierno Habib Khan, revealed that the housing sector in Africa needs to mobilize financing worth $1 trillion. During his participation in the 44th General Assembly of Shelter Afrique Development Bank held in Algeria, Tierno Habib Khan said that Africa needs to build 52 million housing units to meet the needs of its citizens.
A major advantage of bridging the gap in housing is the fact that you can use your own resources, not your human beings as well as the natural resources, the clay, the limestone, etc., and you can create employment in the process. The moment you start importing building materials, you are more or less alienating your own citizens. The solution that should come from delivering housing for them, giving them job to do in the building material industry is lost. And it worsens the issue of balance of payment and foreign exchange problem for the African countries. So there is a lot of work that we all have to do to make sure that we get to where we want to go.
The CEO of Shelter Afrique Bank praised Algeria's experience in the housing sector, particularly its ability to build its homes using local raw materials. Let's have a listen.
There are African countries that have succeeded in constructing housing units using 100% locally manufactured materials, such as Algeria, which is a pioneer in this field. Today, we discussed how to generalize the Algerian experience across the continent, in addition to exporting Algerian products in African countries.
And participants at the 44th General Assembly of Shelter Afrique Development Bank held in Algeria agreed on the need to develop a strategy for affordable housing development. Bank members also agreed on the need to use local materials in construction to reduce import costs and support local production. Participants also called on African central banks and financial institutions to increase their funding for the housing sector.
Aujourd'hui, nous avons un déficit de plus de 52 millions de logements à travers tout le continent. In Africa today, we have a shortage of 52 million housing units. To build this massive number of housing units, we need to raise financing of approximately $1 trillion. This was the subject of our discussions today with all our partners from various organizations and member states of Shelter Africa Bank to find solutions to finance housing construction, in addition to supporting local production of building materials to reduce construction costs.
The Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Secretary General Younes Magraman discussed Algerian-Colombian relations with Colombia's Foreign Minister Rosa Yolanda Villavicencio, focusing on ways to boost momentum, particularly in the economic sector, and exploring prospects for strengthening bilateral partnership ahead of the fifth session of political consultations to be held in Algeria later this semester. According to a statement from the Algerian Foreign Ministry, on the sidelines of his participation in the emergency ministerial meeting on Israel's grave violations of international law against the Palestinian people held in Bogota, Magraman and Villa also exchanged views and analyses on various international and regional issues of mutual concern, including developments in Palestine and Western Sahara. And Algeria has launched a new service to seek to simplify the legislation or the legalization of documents for use abroad. State Secretary Soften Chayeb announced the service following a cooperation agreement between the Foreign Affairs and Post ministries. Citizens can now submit and collect legalized documents through Algeria Post offices nationwide, eliminating the need to travel to the central administration.
This agreement we are signing today will allow those needing document authentication services to submit their files at Algeria post offices spread across various cities of the country, without having to travel to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs headquarters. They will be able to obtain authentication of administrative documents intended for use abroad via Algeria post offices, which will then be responsible for sending them to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We will handle the verification of these documents through the same channels and within very reasonable deadlines. This agreement concerns all individuals and users of the authentication service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether they are citizens residing inside the country or abroad.
And in Morocco, opposition parties are sounding the alarm over what they call the government's blatant bias toward the rich and powerful, warning that the country's political and social direction is becoming increasingly dangerous. Hassan Barkan has more.
Moroccan political parties have accused the Makhzen government of reinforcing a governance model that serves wealthy and powerful circles, ignoring transparency, accountability, and citizens' demands. In a statement, the Justice and Development Party directly accused Prime Minister Aziz Akhnouch of openly defending conflicts of interest in parliament.
Prime Minister Aziz Akhnouch no longer stays silent on conflicts of interest. He now openly defends them in parliament, posing an implicit threat to the state and attempting to intimidate those demanding accountability. We denounce the government's silence on the collusion of fuel distribution companies, which have made excessive profits without facing any serious action, raising questions about who is protecting them and allowing them to drain the pockets of Moroccans. We also condemn the Competition Council's bias, targeting small investors while ignoring the influence of major producers and exporters in setting prices. This government approach clearly favors the economically powerful at the expense of the vulnerable.
For its part, the Federation of Democratic Left said Morocco's political and social situation has dangerously veered off course. It described the repeated talk of social state as a mere media cover for failed policies that justify poverty, employment, and exclusion with weak excuses.
We express our deep concern about the path being taken by the Makhzen government. The political and social situation has dangerously deteriorated, and decision-making is now entirely closed to independent opposition. State institutions have become tools in the hands of power and wealth. This is happening amid a wave of arrests targeting journalists, activists, and social movement leaders. The repeated talk of a social state is just a media cover for failed policies that justify poverty, unemployment, and isolation. Meanwhile, the ruling minority continues to benefit from lucrative deals in energy, essential goods, and strategic sectors without any real oversight or accountability.
As criticism mounts, Morocco's opposition is calling for urgent change, warning that the current path only deepens inequality and public distrust.
Libya's advisory committee on Wednesday proposed 4 options for holding the country's next elections. According to a Facebook post by the UN mission in Libya, one key proposal involves negotiating a political agreement with current parties to form a unified government to oversee the elections. Other suggestions include setting a 4-year term for parliament, electing new houses of representatives and senate, and holding presidential elections based on a new permanent constitution. The United Nations expressed deep concern over reports of brutal attacks on villages in the Kordofan region of Sudan amid escalating hostilities. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that attacks on villages in the Bara region of North Kordofan between July 10 and 13 left at least 300 people dead, including children and pregnant women, and dozens of others seriously injured. OCHA added that confirming the exact number of civilian casualties remains difficult due to the ongoing communication blackouts in the region. The Iranian parliament stated on Wednesday that any future negotiations with the U.S. must be preceded by clear conditions, stressing that Washington's past use of talks as a tool for deception and to cover up Israeli aggression no longer allows a return to the negotiating table. In the same manner, in a public session, the parliament statement emphasized that the U.S. is no longer a trustworthy party for any future negotiation unless there is prior commitment to conditions that safeguard Iran's interests and prevent a repeat of scenarios of deception and aggression, according to them. And US President Donald Trump revealed new details regarding planned tariffs on imported medicines, announcing that the United States will proceed with imposing them by the end of July. Trump said the tariffs would begin at a low rate to give companies time to shift manufacturing operations to the US before imposing much higher tariffs in about a year. Ladies and gentlemen, our program has come to an end. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.